Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying your day so far here at FTT North America. I'm Laura Camperson, Product and Content Manager at VC Innovations, and I'm very excited to be moderating this panel today on scaling into North America. So we're going to be taking a look at some of the opportunities of scaling into the US and to Canada, how fintechs might approach this and how they might overcome some of the challenges of navigating a new market. So as we go through our discussion today, please do add any comments in our chat on the right of your screen. If something that is brought up sparks something in your own experience, then do share with us, and any questions for any of our speakers as well, please ask away in the chat. So I am joined by four panelists today, representing between them a wealth of experience of both supporting fintechs, taking that leap into North America, or who can actually share direct experience as a fintech who has made this jump. So I hope that you're all going to leave the session today with some inspiration, maybe some inside knowledge and encouragement on scaling into this continent of opportunity. So welcome to the four wonderful panelists joining us. Thank you so much for being here. And I would like to briefly, if I can, just hand over to each of you in turn to introduce yourselves. So I'd like to start with Karen, please. Tell us who you are and what do you do?
Hi, and thanks very much for the welcome, Laura. I am Karen Bradbury. I work for Invest Northern Ireland, which is the economic development agency for Northern Ireland, and my role within that is financial services sector lead. So as the economic development agency for Northern Ireland, we support new and existing businesses to grow and to compete internationally, and also support new investment in Northern Ireland from outside. My role as financial services sector lead, I'm supporting the growth of the sector in Northern Ireland, and do that in two main areas. One is to work with financial services and fintech companies and help them explore opportunities outside Northern Ireland and develop trade opportunities, and then also work with our in-market teams to support new inward investment into Northern Ireland in the area of financial services and fintech. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Karen. No, really looking forward to exploring some of the ways that you support fintechs in developing in new markets, as you say, on the session today. And Stewart, if I could come to you next, please, for your introduction.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Laura, for inviting me to be part of the panel today. My name is Stewart Marks. I work for an organization called Fintech, and my role specifically is Head of Business Development. I'm based in New York. Fintech is a Northern Irish company, but I am actually based in New York to be in very close proximity to our clients. We're a reg tech company providing solutions for all our clients. All our clients are investment banks, so very much focused in the financial services industry. And what we are here to do is to design and implement solutions to help them meet their regulatory obligations. Our key areas of focus are legal risk and compliance, KYC consultancy, and technology. And our clients are stretched across the globe. We have clients in North America, in Europe, and in Asia. And we're probably in the early stages of our US expansion, and we have around 50% of our clients actually based in North America, predominantly in New York and Toronto. So my main focus at the moment is trying to grow out our business in North America.
Great. Well, really, really pleased to have you here today, Stuart. That's going to be some valuable experience to share, being at the early stages of expanding into the US and Canada, as you say. Layal, if we could come to you next, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll echo what the rest of the panelists said. Thank you for having me on here. Always lovely to represent Canada. And happy St. Patrick's Day, I suppose, as well, should go out, a belated one. So I'm here to represent Fintech Cadence. I'm the executive director of the organization. And we are a Canada-based organization that focuses on building and fostering the fintech ecosystem. And what that predominantly means is working with very early stage startups, so seed and pre-seed startups, to help them either establish partnerships with financial institutions, help help them in their funding, help them navigate the regulatory landscape here in Canada, or just even help them with their product development and components there as well. Another part of what we do is work directly with financial institutions to see what their needs are and really help them in the innovation process that they're going through, whether it's through their innovation departments or whether it's through their IT departments or cybersecurity. So we have good visibility between all of the stakeholders that operate in Canada. And while we are Montreal-based, we do have and have kept our eye open on the full Canadian landscape as well.
Great. Well, welcome, Leal. Thank you for joining us. And finally, Tom, if we could come to you for your introduction, please.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to participate with all of you today in this panel. My name is Tom Carpenter. I run public affairs and marketing for the Financial Data Exchange, or FDX. FDX is a market-led, open source, royalty-free standards body. We operate in the US and Canada and really make our name as the broadest open finance standard around technical API-based data sharing. So really our goal is helping the ecosystem, and that is everybody from the financial institutions that hold the data aggregators and industry utilities that help consumers move their data around, and then the Fintechs, the data recipients, the apps and services that users are sharing their data with. And so we operate in the US and Canada today. We have about 178 members across the ecosystem, and we've moved, at this stage, 12 million consumers from screen scraping-based data sharing to API-based data sharing. So looking really forward to the conversation about some of the opportunities and challenges that exist in North America.
Great. Yes, as am I, Tom. Thank you again. I've got such a wonderful range of experience on this lineup today. So yeah, absolutely agree. It's going to be a great conversation. Now, I'd like to get started by coming back to each of you in reverse order. So we'll start with you, Tom, if that's okay. I'd be really interested to hear your perspectives on what are some of the key considerations for fintechs when scaling into a new market? So Tom, if I could come to you, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's such a big question, and I'm sure we'll get into
yes.
some of the specific details as we go forward. But I think what's interesting from my vantage point as a standards body, and so we really get a chance to work with all of the different industry segments that make all this possible. To me, one of the key indicators for fintechs is the need for collaboration. So, obviously it's a highly competitive landscape. There's a lot of innovation and disruption that's occurring, and yet you still have these legacy players that are in place and they're there. The consumers are aware of them. There's regulatory overlays with some of those legacy players, and so it's figuring out how can you collaborate, how can you plug into the ecosystem. And sometimes that's difficult for the smaller fintechs that are just starting up. Their focus is making sure that they don't die, making sure that they're still around in a year. And so how do you play in kind of the larger space sometimes can be a challenge. So that opportunities for collaboration is really one of them. Secondly, and maybe I'll focus on some of our world in terms of technical standards, it's trying to figure out where are some of the building blocks in the industry that you can do through common interoperable means rather than trying to kind of build the same mousetrap over and over again. So, we don't need so many proprietary solutions if there's essentially a commonality to some of those foundational layers. So whether it's security or whether it's technical standards or whether it's user experience and how you might be able to standardize some of those things. So I'll stop there because I know our panelists have other thoughts, but looking forward to more in this discussion.
Yes. Well, no, you're right. It's a big question to start out with, isn't it? But I like that concept of collaboration, even as a disruptive player. That's very interesting. And Leal, can I come back to you next? From your perspective, what are some of the key considerations fintechs need to take into account when scaling into Canada? Perhaps you echo or maybe have some different aspects that you would bring up compared to Tom's points. I'm not sure, but yeah, what are some of the key considerations from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to disagree with Tom so we can have some heated debate here, but unfortunately, it's absolutely yeah. I really echo what he says, so I'll start there. And for the sake of our audience, I won't repeat everything that he says, but what I will add on to it from our perspective as well is understanding that Canada is really split provincially. It does have different realities, which can be quite challenging for some. I know we're going to get into the challenges later, but looking at consideration is really where is your base going to be. I think a very clear understanding of what you're hoping to achieve from the expansion into Canada as well. Is it market share? Is it testing regulatory policies? Is it the technology? You know, we have a talented country full of artificial intelligence talent, a lot of blockchain. We have quite a few diversity in our developments there. So really understanding and being clear of why are you coming into Canada, what's the main objective, and then how can you keep track of that and not lose focus. And then the other thing, which I'll also echo Tom, is the collaboration is really key. Canadian ecosystem is really interlinked with each other. And so oftentimes it's really good to come in understanding who is going to be a champion for you in a specific industry. And if you don't have that connection and network, who can you work with in terms of accelerators or incubators, such as ourselves, not to be self-promoting, but such as ourselves, to really help you open that network, because it can be a little bit of a closed ecosystem if you're not really familiar. It doesn't intend to be, but I can imagine people who are coming from different countries might get that perception. So how can you find somebody that can help you create champions internally in financial institutions to help that collaboration that Tom was mentioning earlier?
Yeah, fantastic. Starting out with a key goal in mind to kind of stick to of what you're hoping to achieve. And now, Karen, you obviously have a lot of experience of this from your perspective of helping and supporting fintechs. So can you shed some light on some of these key pieces of advice or knowledge you think are crucial for consideration for those fintechs who are looking at scaling into a new market?
I would guess, as particularly in financial services, it's such a complex market, and we talked previously around the different regulation within in each of the states or each of the provinces in Canada. So it's really understanding your route to market, and I suppose to echo Lael's point around what you're hoping to achieve. I think that each of the banks, if your target market is the banks, each has a very different buying process, very different decision making elements. So it's really understanding what your route into the market is going to be, and how you're going to access that, and what's the best way to get the accessibility. Also, I mean, Northern Ireland is a small region within the UK, so I'd echo both Tom and Lael's point around collaboration. To me, collaboration is essential to build critical mass, and to be able to actually to actually break into the market. You need to be collaboration will be a really important part of that, and building that critical mass and understanding the market that you're trying to target.
Absolutely. And finally, Stewart, I think your input on this opening question is very important, because you've been there, you've done this successfully. So could you share with us a little of your experience, what it was like scaling into the US? Anything that's really you think is a key consideration that the other fintechs may want to bear in mind before taking on this challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things that we asked ourselves at the outset of expanding into North America was, is it a new market, or is it actually just an extension of the existing market that we already operate in? And I think we're obviously a financial services firm, and so it's global by its nature. Yes, we're largely based in Northern Ireland, but what we do for the UK, what we do for Europe, can largely be translated across to North America. And that was a key consideration and a key question that we asked ourselves at the outset. I think then whenever we embarked on the expansion to North America, one of the key considerations was, what does the market look like over here? What's the competitive landscape? We had a really good grasp in terms of what the UK was like. We had a really good grasp in terms of what Europe was like. But North America is a different ball game. There's lots of other competitors out there. So we spent a lot of time focusing in on that and looking at analysis to say, who's already here and what are they doing? And I guess the last point I would make is, once we had done that, we tried to establish where the gaps in the market are. And by gaps, I don't mean, a glaringly obvious, abyss out there. It actually can be something that's already in existence, but can be done better. and maybe more cost effectively. And that's really where we start to focus our attention. It doesn't need to be the newfound thing. It can actually be something that's already there, but we can do it that little bit better.
Great. And Stuart, I really like that idea of looking at it as an extension into a market rather than it being a completely new market. I think that's a very interesting way to look at it. Now, you know, assessing a gap in the market, understanding the market completely and kind of who to collaborate with and finding your way. And it all sounds great when you lay it out like that. But this is challenging to do in practice, isn't it? So, you know, you've all flagged a few of the challenges already, you know, the complexity of a market, understanding the regulation and the differences and navigating that new environment. So perhaps we could get some deeper insight into some of the barriers for entry that fintechs might encounter, you know, such as this complexity and this difficulty perhaps understanding a new ecosystem. Tom, if I could start with you, what are your thoughts on some of the challenges and the barriers that might be experienced?
Yeah, thank you. I will start with maybe a couple different areas, thinking about complexity of market, some of the market cultural indications, as well as some of the regulatory pieces. So I think the complexity of the market is really interesting, especially when you look at the US. A lot of the developed markets around the world, you might have a single financial regulator. You may have just a handful of large financial institutions that really control a majority of the banking traffic. And then you look in the US, we've got 14,000 different financial institutions scaling up from the very smallest credit union or community bank up to some of the world's largest banks. We've got, depending on how you count, somewhere as many as 8 different regulators that have a piece of the pie around fintech and data sharing and privacy. There's also the cultural component. You know, is a market more kind of industry led by default, or is it looking more for regulatory partnership? And is the regulation typically what goes first, and then the markets kind of respond to that? In the US, typically we have usually an industry-led front foot, and that's indicative of how FDX really got started. And then the last one I'll say is just from a size standpoint, and I mentioned this at the beginning. If you've got a very small startup fintech, there are a lot of different pieces that you're trying to pay attention to. And for most small businesses, it's just, hey, we are going to focus on our core business here. Who are our customers and how can we deliver the best product or service to them? But when you think about all these different layers, you have to devote a lot of energy to things that are not necessarily bringing direct dollars in the door. And so that can be a challenge, especially if you have tight resources, whether they be monetary or people at the table.
No, absolutely. There's so many moving parts and pieces to consider, isn't there? And Leao, you mentioned earlier, Tom draws on the regulatory complexity of the United States, but you mentioned earlier that Canada is not entirely united in this way either. So does that seem to mirror some of your perspectives on the difficulties and barriers that might be faced when entering Canada as a fintech scaling into Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting we're having this conversation when we just found out a few days ago that Revolut was going to be leaving Canada. While they haven't disclosed the exact reasons, I think some of us on the backside are trying to figure out exactly what happened there, whether it's being seen as positive or negative. I won't hold a stance on it, but just to see here is a successful company, a successful fintech that was trying to expand into Canada. And some of the conjecture around it is that it was regulation. So one thing, and this is why I think when we often talk about fintech in general, regulations time and time again comes up as a challenge, unless for Stewart, because then it's, as we mentioned before, it's a bit easier on his side. But one of the challenges with Canada and regulations is that we still don't have open banking. And there's no real clear timeline or structure of when that might actually be happening. Time and time again, we've gone through consultations with the Canadian government. I think there is interest, but it hasn't really come to fruition. And again, like I mentioned, without even a clear action plan. And so that really hinders a lot of the startups and might be quite challenging for a lot of the startups, especially, as Tom mentioned, the smaller startups, because that's a lot of capital you need to now move towards regulatory policy and compliance. Our banks are heavily regulated as well. And again, to touch on your point, while Canada is federally regulated, our banking system is federally regulated, our insurance, for example, is not as provincially regulated. And so you have to, again, navigate that landscape. The other thing I will say, and trying to give a bit of different perspective here than Tom, but for us as well in Canada, our consumers are by nature more conservative. Some of the stats that we often spout out is most consumers who started with their first financial institution, are still with them, and that's 97% of the population. There's really still wariness around what fintechs and how to navigate with fintechs. So there is also just that traditional and cultural process. And then lastly, I'll say the other challenge that fintechs who are coming into Canada might face is the access to capital. We are nowhere near we have near as much capital access as the United States, not only for our own startups as well, but for any of the ones coming abroad. So that's something to take into account as well. If you are looking to come into Canada for access to capital, it's something to keep your eye out on. That our investors are very conservative and very wary about what they're doing with fintechs, especially earlier stage fintechs versus Series A and Series B.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really about fully understanding that landscape that you're going into, isn't it? In terms of the consumer attitudes, as you say, the regulation landscape, just so many parts to consider. You joke, Lael, that Tom, Stewart, sorry, perhaps has a bit more of a vested interest in regulation than some fintechs going into a new market, being a reg tech. But Stewart, I wonder, was that something that you found challenging? As you were scaling into to North America, was it the regulatory aspect? Did you find that complicated to tackle and to manage, or perhaps were there some other challenges that you found? What do you think was your biggest challenge, I guess, as a fintech entering the North America market?
Yes, so I probably take a slightly different view than Lael and Tom. As an organization that benefits from all the work that comes from the regulation, it's quite popular with us. I think probably some of the key challenges that we find, Laura, where first and foremost, we have a large portion of our clients already in North America across New York and Toronto. So, that entrance into the market was made slightly easier because people knew who Fintry were. We already had working relationships with them, so we weren't starting from zero. And I think aside from the physical relocation of moving people and moving assets to North America, one of the key challenges was that competitive landscape. Who else, I've mentioned it earlier, who else is here? Who else do we need to consider as our competitors, and how do we differentiate ourselves? I think from the local kind of regulatory perspective, we have very quickly found that the US is more similar to Europe than we actually cared to imagine. Someone said to me recently that looking at the US is actually like looking at each different country in Europe. So each state in the US has its own rules, regulations, employment laws, ways of entering the market, which is very similar to Europe if you're going to enter into France, Germany, Spain. And so that's something that we've had to take another look at and say, okay, as we grow our operation here, what does that look like? Where do we need to go? Where are the states that we need to be looking at? And what are those key considerations? And, that's a future state. We're still very much based in New York today. But as we look to scale, where else should we be looking, and what are those key considerations? And I think that's where the other panelists on the call really help an organization like ourselves, because we can look to them for that intelligence to say, what should we be doing in this scenario? But I think because we're already known in the market over here, our entrance into this area has probably been more straightforward than it might be for a fintech or a reg tech that has had zero presence in North America.
Mm-hmm. No, and you're absolutely right. It's so important to have groups like on the panel today to look to for intelligence and for support. And Karen, I'd like to bring you in on that point. Again, this is something that you will have experience of, providing support to fintechs as you do. So what do you think can help to address some of the challenges that the other panelists have been raising? And perhaps you could tell us about some of the kinds of support that you offer for fintechs.
No problem. It's certainly one of the areas that we find is supporting the knowledge and developing knowledge. There's do that in a variety of ways. One is through in-market advisors. So we may employ a group of specialists who would do research on our behalf, on behalf of companies, either with geographic expertise or sectoral expertise. And in financial services, it tends to be more on the financial services side. We would also work across the sort of back to the collaboration, where we would support groups of companies, develop like trade missions for them to bring them into the market to explore the opportunities there, maybe around a specific trade mission and meeting with other advisors or other companies within that, and identifying potential decision makers within companies, or also around an event such as Fintech Talents. And actually we have 13 companies joining us on our virtual booth. So if you get a chance, we'd be grateful if you came along just to find out what the companies are offering and the potential solutions that they're doing, and supporting companies to do that, both by setting it up but also financially supporting it as well. We can also do market research on behalf of the sector, so maybe exploring, if we've a group of companies that are saying, well, actually we would like to explore the US market, we could research some of the things around buying patterns or purchasing powers, key decision makers, and try and map that out for companies to try and make that entry into the market more straightforward, or as straightforward as we can be. Also, we have a network of of offices in the US and in Canada. We have offices in New York, Boston, on the West Coast, and in Toronto and Chicago as well. So we've teams who are living and working in North America, and they're a great support, not just in terms of maybe understanding the financial services companies, but also being able to plug companies into professional services, and advice for setting up a business in New York, or setting up, what's the best way to actually access the market. So, and also then there's financial support, because as Tom alluded to earlier, cost is a huge thing in terms of resources and time. So we, as an economic development agency, we will also provide financial support to businesses as they're looking to develop their route into the market and get set up there, and really, I guess, support some of the risk involved in that as they're trying to research new opportunities. And then also we support physical presence. So you're looking at fintech companies in the North America who are looking to scale into Europe or into the UK. We can support them in terms of setting up a presence in Northern Ireland, or maybe looking at opportunities within that and providing some information on what the landscape is like there. So we can scale both ways.
Fantastic. Well, we're really pleased to have you at FTT North America today, and as Karen just said, please do and go and visit the booths. But after this panel, as we still have a number of other topics to discuss, then go and visit the booths. So all of those things that you share, that support, that the kind of inside knowledge and advice, that's so important, I think, to be able to support companies entering kind of an unknown environment. I suppose, but I wonder if we can come back to some of these regulatory barriers. I wonder internally, is there anything that's kind of being done? Perhaps Tom and Leao, you could share some insights on approaches to maybe review or even tackle some of these regulatory barriers and make it easier, open it up for fintechs to enter to the market. Perhaps maybe open banking is being explored, for example. Tom, could you expand on that a little for us?
Yeah, certainly. So open banking or open finance, which I think a lot of the market is beginning to move to, which is this idea, that we do have a set of data elements that are traditional banking, and then it's much broader when we think about kind of all elements of financial data and how might a consumer want to use their own financial data in a range of fintech apps. The regulatory piece is an interesting one, because so far we've seen some examples. The UK was really the first mover. We've seen it in Australia and some other jurisdictions where it truly is kind of a start from the regulatory standpoint. The US has really started from a market-led standpoint. So the question is not so much, oh, we need a clear regulatory framework, but is open banking happening? Are consumers able to use and leverage their own data? And so in the US, through standards bodies like FDX, we've been able to kind of move that ball forward. That said, technical standards can only go so far. There are still very elemental and fundamental policy questions that have to be answered. And so I think what we're seeing in the US and Canada are a little bit of push-pull of probably what will land with a hybrid approach. So where are there rules or guardrails that need to be clarified and that need to be stipulated? And then what can the marketplace do to make sure that standards and some of those foundational elements that we talked about are able to consistently and nimbly respond to market conditions? In terms of approaches to regulation, I mean, I come from a kind of government affairs background, and I'm always a big fan of engagement. So meeting with your policymakers and regulators in your country of jurisdiction or even in your locale to explain what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. And then I also think this is really where collaboration comes in place. No single fintech is going to be able to have kind of such a loud voice that they on their own will be able to move the policy needle. And so coming together with the whole ecosystem or even an industry market segment to be able to communicate what are our core needs or what are the key questions that are that remain outstanding is really important. And so maybe I'll just kind of wrap up by saying that I feel like the regulatory piece is really important because there are unanswered questions. And at the same time, I think that that we've kind of put open banking or open finance into this box that says it always needs to be regulation first and then the market can move forward. When in fact, if we look at it, a lot of consumers are already participating in open finance. They may just not know the term. And there's a lot of growth and innovation that's occurring. So I think we need to kind of hold both together, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That completely makes sense. It's good to hear that open finance is already having an impact, and as you say there, I think both engagement from the regulatory side and then kind of collaboration from the fintech side as well to put forward core needs, and hopefully will lead to some changes. Leah, what about for Canada? Is open banking, open finance something that you're seeing being explored? Are there other ways in which regulatory barriers are being reviewed and perhaps tackled? Or do you think that there is more that still needs to be done in this area?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, Tom, I mean, I feel bad always going after you because all I'm saying is ditto and agreed there. So I do agree in a large part with what
I'll make sure to swap it for the next.
The next one. But for us, again, the difference is that Canada is a much tighter regulatory landscape than the US. There's no questioning that. But I want to say two things here specifically around that. And, highlighting what Stewart had mentioned earlier is that does mean there might be a lot of opportunities for those who are in the reg tech space to come into Canada, because there is still a lot of movement looking around, well, how can we work with fintechs to help us accelerate the movement of regulations to benefit everyone and all of the stakeholders within it. So with, I might put the picture or create the narrative that Canada has a really tough regulatory landscape, but I hope that those who are in that landscape are looking at it and saying, well, that means there's an opportunity there. The second thing I'll say is, and maybe it's very Canadian of us, so even though we have very tight and strict regulatory policies, our regulators are very friendly and are always looking to, open for discussions. We have direct access to every single regulator. It's very difficult to not get access to them. So in that sense, it's really great. So if you are coming in and you are trying to navigate one specific component of it, then the regulatory bodies will be there to support you and help you. I think there is no doubt that regulators do want a more innovative landscape, if I can just use a lot of buzzwords here. They do want an innovative landscape, but I think their challenge is that they have a lot to account for. They have to make sure that consumers are protected. They have their responsibilities that they have to follow. And so it's not a matter of, okay, how do we hinder startups from coming in and navigating in the space, or rather, how can we do it in a safe way? And as a fintech that's entering into Canada, that should be an understanding of, okay, it's not that they don't want it to happen, but it's that they're trying really hard to figure out how to make it happen, and they're not moving at the right speed. And maybe that is different conversation. When it comes to open banking, open data, open financing, like I said earlier, Canada has been playing around with it for a few years now. We are advocates of it. and we're trying to push. And I really liked what Tom was saying in that if you really want your voice heard with policy change, you have to do it as a collective. I know a short while back, Plaid, API aggregator out of the US, based out of the US, was looking to see how they can expand into Canada. And one of the approaches that they were taking was looking at contributing to the consultations that were being done by the Canadian government around open banking, releasing reports as well. So there are ways to do it. Unification in voice is probably the best way, as Tom has suggested. But it really is as well seeing, keeping our eye out in the UK, for example, is always a big thing for us. I think we mentioned earlier the Khalifa report is something that we're looking at as well. So nothing yet concretely in Canada with open banking, but definitely something that those who are in the ecosystem are pushing strongly for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that concept of pushing for what you want and having your voice heard, as you say, through collaboration is really coming through strongly from all of your perspectives. So we're starting to get to the end of our session today, but there's something that I wanted to touch on that was brought up earlier, and that was Tom, you mentioned around kind of a cultural component to all of this. Understanding whether the market operates in a way that is similar to the culture the fintech is currently based in. So, in making all of this successful, I wonder about the importance of cultural compatibility. And Karen, perhaps with your experience of both the Northern Ireland presence in North America and the reverse also with North American companies investing in Northern Ireland. In making that work, do you think that there's an importance there to cultural compatibility?
I would say it's huge, and it's been one of our main competitive advantages, Laura, cultural compatibility. In both directions, US companies and North American companies who've invested in Northern Ireland would say that's one of our key competitive advantages, and likewise for companies such as Fintech and Stewart moving into the US, and it goes beyond language. I mean, obviously language is an important part of it, but I think it's a large part to do with the people and attitude and kind of that positive can-do attitude and really adaptability, and that's been really evident certainly in the last year during the pandemic. The resilience of the Northern Ireland people and infrastructure meant that as a sector, it has continued to grow. Financial services and fintechs continued to grow. So I think that the language and the kind of the people and their attitude are huge parts. And also another very important part is the diaspora. Even if it's one or two generations removed, that the Northern Ireland diaspora is quite vast, and obviously wider Ireland diaspora. We have found it hugely beneficial where you have a Northern Ireland voice in a potential investor or a potential trade opportunity, who will really champion the Northern Ireland proposition, if you like, and that's been hugely beneficial. And for so many, obviously from immigration from before, but equally just people who have studied now or have worked in Northern Ireland and have moved back home. That has been very special. Then that whole cultural compatibility would be a huge advantage in our experience.
No, that's really interesting. And Stewart, did you find the same with Fintech? When breaking into North America as a market, did you find a shared culture to be important, or what were some of the values that you really tried to focus on, I suppose, when approaching your clients?
Yeah, I would echo what Karen's just said. I think that the cultural similarities between Northern Ireland and the US and Canada have really helped us expand into North America. A lot of our clients, it's funny, people back in Belfast will pick up the phone to one of our clients and they'll find another Northern Irish accent on the other end of the phone. And that's to Karen's kind of diaspora point of view, that we're everywhere. But I think in terms of culture, I think, yes, we're a fintech, we're a reg tech, but people are still at the core of our company. It's our biggest asset. And I know that might sound a little bit cliched, but actually the people that underpin our organization and the culture that they drive forward really is I guess what we say differentiates us from our competitors. But I think from a cultural perspective as well, there's two key things that we focus on as an organization. One is what we call client intimacy. We want to be that company that clients are really, really close to and see as a valued partner as opposed to a third party vendor. And I think once you can break that kind of view of we're no longer that third party vendor, we're actually a trusted partner that are going to be on this kind of long lasting journey with you. I think that's really key. And I think the other point that I would touch on is, and this was feedback from one of our clients very recently, is we as an organization will sell to our clients what they want. We won't go on the hard sell. We won't say, we'll give you X, Y, Z, but also why don't you buy A, B, C from us? And I think that again, we want to be alongside with our clients and have that partnership. We don't want to sell them what they're not looking for. So that client intimacy and that kind of we'll sell you what specifically you're looking for is something that we really, really focus on. But, it's a challenge for us because the culture we've built at Fintry is very, very unique. And as we start to expand and grow in North America, it's translating that into the North American arena where, when we hire locally over here, what does that look like from a cultural perspective? And it's something that I'm very focused on to make sure that we almost create that same culture, albeit in a new area.
Right. No, absolutely. At the end of the day, it is the people, isn't it, that make those relationships long lasting. And Leal or Tom, do either of you have anything to add to this concept of shared cultural and shared values as important in making a successful partnership?
Okay, do we battle it out?
I'll go first.
Yeah,
yes,
well,
you go first.
yes, I think we'll have to let you go first, as you said. Tom had gone first on the other ones.
Perfect. No, I mean, I think Stewart and Karen summed it up really nicely, and I really like what Karen said regarding, leveraging that diaspora and leveraging shared cultures that you have abroad. And what Stewart as well said is like recognizing that this is potentially an extension of cultures you already know or awareness you already know. I think that's wonderfully said. And that's really true to us. I mean, Canada and Northern Ireland and the UK, we share a lot of similarities. And I think there's an affinity to people who come from there. And I don't know if it's the accent or just the historical perspective, but definitely something to keep in mind. And, we mentioned earlier, what are the challenges to note that might hinder as a startup? And that's just, again, understanding consumer behavior, making sure you're aware of that as well when you're coming into the Canadian landscape. But definitely a lot to leverage when you come into Canada and expand on from again, what Karen and Stewart have both said.
Would you agree, Tom?
I would agree with everything that was just said, of course.
Yes, any
final
thoughts for this one?
That's right. All great points. I'm going to build off a couple things that both Leal and Stewart said around kind of that commonality. So clearly there are cultural differences in all these places that need to be accounted for and understood, and whether that's consumer or your customer behavior or expectations, or whether that's a regulatory landscape, which we've already discussed. But one of the things that we're doing at the Financial Data Exchange is saying that we're trying to build a consumer-centric ecosystem. And that really then comes down to trust. We're talking about fintech today. We're talking about innovation. We're talking about a lot of new market entrants and processes. And ultimately, that trust is what propels this forward. There was a recent study out in the US that said Americans still trust financial institutions a great deal, or the ecosystem, with their money. But when it comes to their data, it's 20, 30 points below that trust level. And so we are in a data economy. And so thinking about how do you make the customer more aware, more in control of what they're doing with their own data and using fintech and what their expectations are, so that they are more aware, the process is more transparent. And so I think there's a lot of work that the ecosystem needs to do to elevate that trust with all of the disruption in the marketplace. And to say, yes, this is still an ecosystem where the consumer and the customer are first. And really, I think a lot of other cultural differences can be accounted for if you really nail that single element.
Oh, fantastic. There's a lot of really great insights there, Tom, to consider. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time for this session, but I'd just like to take one final question to the panel, if that's okay. And so taking all of this into account, the opportunities, but some of the challenges as well, and some of the key considerations. But then how do you know when it's time to take the plunge, and when it comes to the when and the where of scaling into a new market? So Karen, if I could start with you, what's your perspective on this? How do you, or would you advise fintechs how to know when it's the right time and where is the right place to take into a new market?
I guess it's back to that understanding of your market, and I think that it is important to have developed a critical mass and a track record in your initial target market, and to have that experience behind you, and if you have that, and then to look to, then is the time to look to external markets. I guess, back to Stuart's point earlier about the US and Toronto being extensions of their market. It's that, I get that understanding of your market. Is it a brand new market, or is it just a shift in geography? I think that's really important, and also to understand that you're providing a solution rather than a really great fintech product or whatever that you're looking to your customer needs. There's no, I think for me, there's no one that this is the right time, but I do think it's important to have that
background. Fantastic. And Stewart, what about from your perspective? How do you feel that you knew when it was the right time, and also the where? I mean, I imagine you went to New York to be close to the financial institutions as your clients, but how do you go about kind of navigating that? Where do I scale into the new market, and when do I take the plunge?
So I think from an organization's perspective like ours, the where is the easier part to answer. As you've already mentioned, so many of our clients are based in New York and in Toronto. And so it was a bit of a no-brainer to have our sales function based out of New York. I think where the challenge comes is, as we look to scale, does it make sense to build a large offering in New York with the costs associated with that and the scalability issues? Probably not. And so there's a lot of emphasis around looking at the local market and looking at alternative states to say, as we grow, where do we go? But I think the most consistent theme is, where do our clients want us to be? If the vast majority of our clients are on the East Coast, it probably doesn't make an awful lot of sense to position us on the West Coast. So it's been largely client driven. I think the when was slightly trickier for us. So, our original plans where we want to scale up in the US in 2015, our CEO spent some time in the US looking at different states. Then Brexit happened in 2016, or the Brexit referendum. And so everything was put on the back burner. Now, in saying that, we're an organization that have scaled up and moved to America in the middle of a global pandemic. So it's hard to kind of put your finger on when is the right time. But for us, it was looking at, and to Karen's point that she already mentioned, we had a tried and tested model that worked in the UK, that worked in Europe. So therefore, we felt that it was ripe and that the time was right for us to transition and move that to North America. I've mentioned before, so many of our clients are based here, so it wasn't as if we were venturing into a new market with we were already here, we already had that presence. And so the when is probably more difficult to put your finger on it and say, this is when we're going to pull the trigger. But for us, the where was straightforward, and the when was just an organic kind of journey to say, we're now ready, we're a large organization, we're ready to make that next step.
Great, thank you. And Layal, if we can get some final thoughts on this from you, how do you know when to take the jump, do you think?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, and I'm
it's very tricky.
But I will say, if you have the why, the when and the where should come easier. So if you're really clear on what the why is in your organization, capital, customers, network, scale, whichever it is, then you should be able to. It should help you navigate, okay, well, where should I be? The thinking there was very clear with Stewart and the company, so it makes a lot of sense. And the when, I absolutely agree, there's a bit of, luck factor, if I can call it that. You know, when do I start my startup? When do I launch my new product? When do I scale? All of those questions have a bit of luck factors to them. But the way we look at it here is, well, how do you de-risk that process? So what's the best ways for you to make it at least risky as possible? And that is, do I have a network there? Am I able to project who my consumers would be, my customers would be? Do I have partners in my current location that operate in North America and operate in Canada that I can reach out to, that I can expand there? So it really is, how do I take all of the factors into account, and how do I make them as low risk as possible? And then, like Stewart says, hope that no other global pandemic happens and you have to do it at the same time. There. So really is, I guess that's the luck.
Absolutely. I think we all hope for that, don't we? Well, lots and lots of fascinating insights shared already. But Tom, if I could just come to you for any final words of wisdom on this one.
Yeah, certainly. So a great question, and I agree with what's been said in terms of, there is a clear riskless move when it comes to entrepreneurship and innovation. But what I see a lot are folks that have maybe underappreciated what the barriers to entry that we talked about a little bit might be, and specifically those that they don't control. So if you need a few regulatory items to be clarified in order for your market to really succeed, you're likely going to be waiting for a long time. And so you really may want to think about, what are any regulatory barriers, or are there marketplace barriers in place? I.e., okay, I need this industry and this industry to adopt this way of doing things, or this digital structured data approach in order to really move the ball forward. And figuring out kind of, where do you not control your own universe and your own ecosystem, to me are some things that I've seen, especially fintechs, show up with wide eyes and great plans, and then really struggle because they don't necessarily control the market. I think the best time is when you've got a product or service you can deliver. You know that the marketplace wants that product or service, and you can do so kind of with very little outside issues, if that makes sense. So I would just say, in sum, it's really trying to take stock of the barriers that you might face and figure out which ones can you control and which ones can't you control.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. So much to consider there. Really understanding that market, having a key goal in mind. Building relationships based on trust and on shared values, and collaborating as well with players already active in the market. And I think just taking that opportunity. No, that's brilliant. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for in our discussion today. I've really enjoyed chatting to you all, and I hope everyone has enjoyed watching. Do let us know your thoughts in the event chat, if this is similar to your experiences, or if you've got any tricks and tips you'd like to share on scaling into North America, or maybe if you're from a fintech who are looking at this as your next step, let us know in the chat, and we can continue the discussion further. But otherwise, stay on the impact stage for some more great content coming up. Don't forget to go and visit our fintech delegation from Northern Ireland. And with that's everything from us. I'd like to thank Tom, Leao, Stewart, and Karen for joining me. And I wish our audience a great rest of your day at FTT North America. Thank you all.